So the folks from Alpine asked me to talk about increasingly capable software and artificial intelligence. I have the advantage of going in the afternoon sessions. You're all a little sleepy and won't throw your chairs at me. So the other advantage is that I've had the opportunity to hear what other presenters have said, and I think hopefully my piece sort of spirals this together for everyone pretty nicely. So before we get started, there's some questions have been coming up in my mind about the assessment industry in general, and this dates back to the fact that we call the Association of Test Publishers Conference Innovations in Testing, and yet every year there's something on Angoff. For like 14 years we've talked about that, right? I'm not a psychometrician. I don't do Angoff settings. I don't know what that is, but I just think, wow, that's really need to move on beyond that. So I like to talk about, are we creating better, faster, cheaper assessments? And I don't mean to minimize the work that any of you in this room do, but cheaper is easier than less expensive, right? And so we want to create better, faster, and cheaper assessments, right? That's ultimately serving our population. That better means it's still got to be valid and reliable. Faster, right? None of you have clients who want to come in and sit and take a 7-hour test, right? No one wants to take an hour-and-a-half long test. They want to get in, out, and be done with this. Ultimately cheaper, right? I've been in enough meetings where price sensitivity, everyone on my side of the table from the vendor side is told, oh, it's too expensive, we can't possibly afford it, but we want simulations, and we want this, and we want that, and we want this, right? And so we really need to work together as an industry, both sides of the table, to create those better assessments. Are we really trusting other experts? And I know the concept of an expert came up earlier. I think what happens a lot of times in the assessment industry, and I'm going to point the finger generally at psychometricians, and I think it's more than just psychometricians, the content folks, is that they don't trust the technologists, right? They've been burned, perhaps, or they look at the technology folks and they're like, whoa, that's new. I can't possibly head down that road, right? You need to validate that and prove it for 20 years before we go forward, like Angoff. The industry needs to embrace the new. As we've all been talking, in the technology world, we use a development methodology called Agile. And if you're not familiar with Agile, look it up and learn it. I was the most resistant person in the world to Agile, and once you start doing it, you realize in the economy that we live in now, you're constantly iterating, you're constantly changing. And the way test development is done is we say, what are we going to measure? Let's take a year and a half to create the test, and oops, that mark has moved already, right? We don't have the time for that sort of development anymore, so we've got to be sensitive to that. The opportunity to redefine what an assessment is. I'm going to show you some data that's probably going to shatter some of your thoughts about what we think of as an assessment. Already we talked on this about big data, and can that be used as an assessment? I would argue that it's probably complementary at this point. It should be used, it's not an either or, it's both until we figure it out a little bit more. And then this notion that there is no finish line. A lot of times we think, oh, there's a certification and I'm done. No, there's no end to that certification, right? I'm not an architect, but I have to believe and trust that the standards change constantly and move beyond this notion of I've got my certification and I change that. So a little bit of your job in this industry is changing the way people think about your test and your certifications and your licensure. Who am I? I'm probably most of your worst nightmare. I got my start in the assessment industry working for Princeton Review. I've actually done well enough to game the USMLE, the United States Medical Licensing Exam, to get a passing score. So you want to talk about bad tests, right? I never went to medical school, and I passed step 1 of the boards, right? That's scary. But it gets to what I like doing. I like solving problems and going through things like this. Since then, I've been working at a company called Vantage Labs. In a variety of different roles, and I think it's important for you to understand the context that I'm presenting under to understand who we are as a company. So I work for this holding company up here. The beautiful part of my job is that I sit next to the CEO and he says, what do you think we should build? We have those think sessions like every 15 minutes. Like, what do you think we should build? Here's money, go do it, right? And we'd all like those opportunities. But what we do is we develop really cool technology here, and we then try and commercialize it in one of these different businesses. These are assessment companies, your world, right? K-12, higher ed, certification, licensure. This is a big data company, right? You want to talk big data? We're working on a project now with Arizona State University. 80 million scored pieces of written work by students measured on about 700 different domains, trying to find what's the signal in there that tells us how to teach better, right? How do we get better writing? So we do lots of big data projects. How many of you used Vantage technology today? Show of hands. One, because he knows the answer. How many of you have an iPhone? Everybody's got an iPhone. We have 17 patents embedded in your iPhone. If you don't use an iPhone, you use Microsoft Word. We've got the grammar checker and spell checker in Word. We build these really high-end pieces of technology, and then we license them out to make you better, because we don't always know how to commercialize them and make them do what you need them to do. And this group, I'm going to mention, Vantage Communications is a phone company. Why that? Because voice, we think, is the next frontier in big data, and the next thing you all are going to be doing in terms of assessing people. It's a lot less bubbling in, a lot less clicking on A, B, C, or D on your computer, and it's going to be spoken interactions, because that's how we work in the real world. The one company I don't have up here, we bought about a year and a half ago. It's actually a material science company, and you might say, why did a technology company get into material science? We actually get down to the molecular level of chemicals to try and figure out how they interact and how they change and become different under different scenarios. Not too dissimilar from the way a candidate changes under different scenarios. And we look at those things because we look back to nature. And I know some of you are probably like, where's this guy going with this? When we talk about artificial intelligence, right, we actually base it on brain science. And the more we've learned about the brain, the more we've actually been able to enhance our engines and enhance the field of artificial intelligence. Now, I told you I was going to pick on some folks from time to time. Anybody from ACT in the room? Fantastic. Okay, so this is one of the things that I just had to bring up because it just came up. It was public. ACT is a client of one of the Vantage companies, a very big client of one of our companies, but I thought this was so emblematic of one of the sort of schisms that measurement field has right now. Take a look. This was a tweet. Go ahead and read that. 5:20 p.m. on the 20th of July. Okay, from ACT student, right? It's about test prep, right? Yay, everybody go out and do test prep, right? 15 minutes later, the head of research at ACT said test prep doesn't work, right? That's a problem, right? For us as an industry, we don't know where we're going sometimes, right? And that is something that's got to shift over time. We've got to accept that there are difference of opinions and different changes and different challenges, and I have the utmost respect for Wayne. I could never do the work he does. I'm not nearly as smart as he is. But this is so problematic for the assessment world to, in one tweet from one of our largest assessment agencies in the country, come out and say, go out and do this, but it's bad, right? It really is this schism that's happening in the industry. So, I love to innovate through the application of technology, right? I am a technologist at heart. I love technology. I do all these wonderful things with technology because I believe the application of engineering principles takes us so much further. Anybody know what this is? It's the Wright brothers. And what did they tell the Wright brothers? You'll never fly, right? What's that? It's an Airbus A380. If you haven't had the chance to fly Emirates Air 380 to Dubai, you can shower at 34,000 feet now, right? We applied engineering principles to a natural process, right? And again, think back, the topic is artificial intelligence. We took a natural process, we applied engineering principles to it, and we advanced it. We took it even further. Anybody know what this happens to be? That's Manning Hall Classroom, where they do a lot of their large assessments, right? They do it and that's from 1890. Anybody want to guess what that is? That's Manning Hall back in 2003. The plastic chairs, slow it down, guys, right? We don't want to go too far too fast, right? This is an industry where we've been talking about ANGOL for 20 years, right? We've got to move that conversation forward. We've got to start to embrace things, okay? So, as the human brain science, the field of human brain science has evolved, we've applied a lot of that learning to technology. Again, think back to the Wright brothers. They took that natural process of the way a bird gets the lift off their wings and applied that engineering principle, and they created planes. The engine that I'm most familiar with is something called Intellimetric, and it's literally an AI engine that can read a piece of text and provide judgments on it. This engine can read and do things that you and I do, right, in this process. This is defined as the reading rope. And we can read, right, because we have facts and concepts, right? We have those in our brain. We know that when I say the word back, what does back mean? Somebody give me a definition for the word back. Okay, I can back up like this or retreat. What else? I can reach around and pat myself on the back. How about anybody think of, I can wager on a horse by backing a horse, right? These are all concepts that are related. If you teach an engine, not necessarily just vocabulary, but concept level information, and you constantly evolve those concepts, it takes a lot of time, right, and a lot of programming and a lot of machine learning. Your engine builds out this thread that gets woven into a skilled reader, right? That's the way the human brain works. Vocabulary, another component. Language structures. Some of this is actually the easiest part. The rules of edited American English, they are what they are. They're rules, right? As all the computer folks in the room know this. We also start to look at other components that are very much like the human brain. Phonemes, the sounds that are made by the way letters mingle with each other, right? The soft L's in could, right? You don't hear a l, you hear could, right? We actually teach the engine how to understand phonemes. This is important because the AI, again, needs to potentially learn new words. A few years ago, we had a challenge with an essay scoring system we were doing where we were getting a lot of non-scorables. And it started around early January, and the number of non-scorables kept going up. Anybody take a guess at what the problem was? Well, there was a new vocabulary word introduced in the K-12 environment that year. That word was the we, W-I-I, right? And if we hadn't realized that, right, the engine needed to basically learn. It knew what we was, but it didn't know was that the phonetic spelling of we, what was going on here. And you've got to essentially train this engine to become smart enough to start picking those up over time and actually develop an ability like the human brain to learn and get better. So this understanding of how the human brain works informs how the AI works. Everybody with me so far? Okay. So, and I say this is innovative application of AI with a question mark because we've been doing this for 20 years. Anybody know who the first commercial application of artificial intelligence-based essay scoring was or written assessments was? It was the College Board. They rolled it out. Why? Because their humans couldn't keep up with the process and they were bad at the process. Again, engineering principles applied to a very natural thing. 20 years ago, we started that. Now, there's so much resistance from this industry. The GMAT exam has been scoring essays with the machine for over 8 years. It's close to 9 years, about 2.5 million papers. They still require a human. Why? Of those 2.5 million papers, every challenge that's come up, the human's been wrong. Right? So why do we keep doing these things that cost us money, and that money perhaps could be used instead of paying humans to grade those papers? Innovate, right? Actually shift the needle a little bit. Take that money and apply it somewhere else. Develop new questions, develop new simulations, something like that that could help a little bit. The other thing about AI is that this is critically important. The futurist this morning talked about thinking on a global scale. We cannot, there are just not enough people to do some of the things you all need to do, right? The reality is when you're looking at testing on a global scale, it gets crazy big, crazy fast. We're working on a project now in China, the College English Test. It is 17 million testers a year, right? And there are just not enough English speakers in China to grade 17 million assessments, right? It's just not going to happen. The next project that follows onto that is 100 million kids taking a test every year, writing a written response to a question. If you want to talk about scale problems, I imagine the Architects Board is a relatively small scale program. This allows you to scale very quickly when you start moving into AI and applying those technologies in a very different way. It happens here on the shores of the United States as well. In California, for similar reasons, they don't have enough faculty members who are competent necessarily to grade student responses. How terrifying is that, right? We should all be worried, right? This assessment issue is so much bigger. And so they've had to apply the same concept of AI to scoring written responses for students and then taking it a little bit further forward. AI is not all that innovative because it's been around for 20 years. But it's starting to be applied by folks like you. I think I said at the beginning, we develop really cool technology, but we don't always know what to do with it, right? We have stuff, if I go back to that original slide with Vantage at the top, we have probably 15 or 20 really cool technologies that you all should look at someday because maybe it'd be beneficial to you. We don't know what to do with them. But one of the areas that we're starting to find when we work directly with folks, the world's largest online retailer, we're not allowed to say their name, but it sounds like Schmamazon, actually has determined that the AI scoring of their employees is the single best indicator of future job performance. So what you're starting to see here is these big guys, these heavyweights in the industry. Facebook is doing work in this field. Amazon is doing work in this field. They're starting to say, hey, if we apply the AI in the right way, we can get these valid and reliable measurements. We can do it at scale because the humans in this room and the humans in the industry at large just aren't enough people to do it all together. Now, the other place that the application has been working quite well is in portfolio review and what I'll call the non-assessment assessment, right? How many of you, your candidates, I should say, or if you're in the assessment field, would love to be able to say to a candidate when they walked up to you, you know what, no need to take the test. We have all this wonderful assessment data on you already. And it's not a big data project, right? It's your practical experience over time. Well, what does a large-scale assessment actually look like? What do you all do when you do your large-scale assessments? What happens? You show up at Jacob Javits Center in New York City, you walk in, you sit down, there's 8,000 other people there, you take a test, you turn it in, and you hope in a few months or weeks you're going to get your results back, right? That's typically what happens. Shift your thinking about that, because when you start applying AI to these things, you're going to get all that measurement that you're looking for, and all the assessment folks that are in the room are going to get all the valid and reliable assessments they want, but it's going to actually look retroactively at the work these folks have done, so that you're also going to be able to see trends in the data. You're going to see, is this a person who is continuing to learn and improve? Is this a person who is falling off the cliff? Now, another question. Show of hands. Would you rather hire a Cornell grad or a York College grad? Cornell? Okay, one. York College? You're going to pass on this. Okay, you're all measurement people. You don't have enough information. Play along with me, okay? Play along with me. Would you rather hire a Cornell grad or a York College grad? Cornell, right? You're going to say they're an Ivy League student. They've already been vetted a little bit. They've gotten an Ivy League education. Well, if we take a look at what the data tells us, Cornell's average score per student after 30 scored written samples by AI, right, looking retroactively, is just above a 4.4. It's about a 4.5. But York College is up here at 5.1, right? So what you're able to do now is take all of this collective work that a human could go back and review, but you don't have the bandwidth to do that. Now a human can go back and say, I'm going to evaluate, or an engine can go back and say, I'm going to evaluate you on all of this work you've already done. I'm not going to force you to take another test because I've already got the data that tells me what you're doing. I know how you're performing. And it's collected all of that information over 4 years of a student going through university, 4 years at college, where have you. The power of this goes much beyond that, because now you can start to apply that. How many of you have gotten emails from your boss or a colleague and you're like, whoa, that's crazy, right? That's awful, right? You want to look at this stuff. You can now retroactively go back and say, wow, should I promote that person to a managerial position? Should I move that person forward based on my requirements for this particular job? This is a measurement. I'm sorry, didn't set that up well, did I? These are for students who have a minimum of 30 pieces of writing, right, across every subject. It can be economics, it can be psychology. Their average score, right, and they were, this is their average performance on those pieces of writing. So the Cornell students scored on average 4.5, whereas York College 4.1. So we're taking a portfolio view of these students, right, a lot of different samples of writing, and we're comparing now Cornell and York College, right, without the bias. We no longer have the bias because the AI does not bring to the table, right, the knowledge that Cornell is an Ivy League and York is not. Okay. So a handful of other applications of really innovative technology and AI that we're seeing in the industry. AI is now being used to identify learning disabilities. Again, post hoc in students or employees' writing. If you're not familiar with the field, about 20% of the population has some sort of language-based learning disability. So in this room, 10 of you should raise your hand if I said, do you have dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, something like that, right? But you may not have ever been diagnosed with that. And so we have these people who show up to work for us who need slightly altered accommodation, slightly different work environment, right? Maybe it's a stand-up desk. Maybe it's a quiet work environment. Maybe it's a place where they can walk on a treadmill while they're typing their emails and doing those sorts of things. this is going to be able to identify those folks from the writing that they do in emails, in memos, and all sorts of things, which advances this understanding of the workforce, right, so that they can become integrated in and a better, real high performer. We've seen this most importantly if you're familiar with the Pegasus rocket program out of Orbital Sciences, which is up in Frederick, Maryland, I think, up the road a bit. They have about 150 engineers who work on the Pegasus rocket program. 98% have some form of learning disability, right? That's really important to know if you're sending a rocket off to space, that these people learn a little bit differently. It doesn't mean that they're not brilliant, right? But they learn a little bit differently, and so you've got to accommodate them so that you get the best out of your employees. The AI is able to actually draw that out from a lot of the content and the patterns that we see in the writing. And if you track that back, it's actually because the head of the rocket program is so wonderfully dyslexic, he can't read his emails. Like if it's not read to him by a screen reader, he can't read it. So he probably searches out those individuals because they see things in a different way. They just have different strengths they bring to it. The other thing that the AI is capable of doing, how many of you at some point in time have had a candidate threaten violence towards your program or your nobody? Oh, 1, 2, okay, yeah, I was gonna say, hands better go up, right? We get about a suicide note a month, and we're now flagging those instantaneously, right? So now as you start to scan a student response or a candidate response, you can flag those responses and say, pull that person and notify the proper authorities, whether it is the board, whether it is a police officer, whether it is a school resource officer, a counselor, something like that. But the engine's actually able to discern the difference between someone writing about Macbeth, where there's lots of death imagery and suicide and all those sorts of things, and being able to actually say, oh no, this person may hurt themselves, may hurt somebody else because they didn't pass their particular certification exam. Yeah, suicide notes or threatening notes, right? I hate the bar examiners, I'm going to blow up the building, I'm going to, those are the overt ones. It's the subtle ones that we tend to flag on, and those are easy to pick out. But when you identify those, you can start to, again, put the necessary precautions in place. It is terrifying, the number we get. Like I said, it's about a suicide note a month right now from candidates. One of the other applications, facial recognition. Anybody here ever shop in Lowe's? This is actually an offshoot of some work we did with Lowe's. Okay, when you go into Lowe's, right, have anybody ever seen digital signage for the prices? No? Okay, they were oh, you have, okay. If you've seen digital signage, do you know why they have digital signage for pricing? It's because they're now doing facial recognition with AI and changing the price based on whether you go like this or you're like, hey, great, a light bulb, right? They are now doing that in Lowe's, and they're pushing it out further and further. So when you walk in and you see the sign that says, you may be monitored for security purposes, they're doing it for beyond security purposes. So now it's not just-in-time pricing. So there's an evolution of this towards learning, teaching and learning, and assessment of information is when I present a concept to you, do I get the, hey, that's great, or do I get the, what the hell is he talking about? Look, right? And you start to use this to evaluate some things. It's in the evolutionary stage right now with assessments, but it's literally using that sort of computer eye and AI information to determine whether or not someone is cognitively connecting with you. Yeah. Well, not necessarily, well, they can change the price, but there's no rules that says you can't change your price, right? Except in New Jersey where they can only change the gas prices once a week. No, if you see the lower price, if you pick it up, you take it off the shelf like that and walk through. You're all set.
So being against my will doing yourself.
Yeah. Yes, by not working on your house, you're probably ahead of the game. So use that with your significant other, you'll be all set. One of the other things that the AI has started to do is we've started to look at what we call a pre-assessment assessment, right? Before a student ever sits down for an assessment, one of the issues that we have had in our education businesses, we feel like there's all this build up towards these summative tests, right? We build, there's this summative test, and then the student may not do well, and there's test anxiety issues, there's test prep issues, a whole bunch of different things. But is our goal really to prevent people from doing what they want to do, or is it to teach them the information and get them to know that, right? This is much more from a learning perspective. So what the AI is doing is actually going back and it's reading the students' notes and the students' summaries and saying, did they actually capture this information? Did they understand the concepts? Did they document that they understand the concepts so that I don't have to reteach it? Because giving someone a test that you know they're going to fail, that's morally reprehensible, right? If we know they're going to fail a test, there's no reason to give them the test or charge them the $500 you're going to charge them. So we're actually going back and saying, look, we're going to look at what you did to study, and we're going to actually evaluate that first before we even admit you to take the exam. Again, an emerging area to try and help things along a little bit. The final thing related to AI is that we're trying to organize all of the world's information. I loved in the morning session when the Amazon wants to sell you everything. We want to organize all the world's information. And we do that right now in the medical world. Again, another great connection. We actually read and index with AI all of the patient records. So in this morning session, we talked a little bit about pulling in all that data from that cluster of machines that we saw in the NICU. When you go to the doctor, one of the biggest areas that's left out in an evaluation of you as a patient are the unstructured patient notes. Why? Because it's really hard to understand text and understand all that information unless you've got AI. So now we're actually able to go in and do an evaluation or an assessment of that documentation of patient findings or doctor findings, and then connect that back to the hard data, the structured data. So bringing all of that to light with AI is pretty important. Now, two areas, since this was beyond just AI, that I wanted to touch on. The Internet of Things we talked about a little bit earlier. The IoT is big and growing, and I'll tell you how we apply it in our company. You'll see two devices up here. One is the iPhone, and one is this. It's called a Titan GPS sensor. If any of you have probably kids at this point who are competitive athletes, right? We're tracking athletes all the time now by putting these little sensors in their socks or their vests, and they wear them. We've actually started doing this with employees. So we track where they are, what they're doing, where they're going, and if they don't have a Titan sensor on them, they actually have a company-issued cell phone where we've installed an app that actually tracks all this information, because we want to get to an evaluation of what makes a good employee. In the K-12 world, we apply this a lot in our sales teams. Anybody know what the optimum number of, I'll call it touches, its engagements with a customer is in the K-12 environment to sell a K-12 ed tech product? 6.2. Right? 6.2, if a sales rep comes to their manager and says, I've done 5 visits and I'm not going back to that customer, you got to go back at least one more time. You're getting to the point where you're actually tracking this level of information, and we only know that because we're starting to monitor where they are and how they're going. Again, a lot of people concerned, big brother, you don't have to work for Vantage, that's fine. But the IoT is something that I think is going to continue to grow, and you're going to see that as sort of a metric that you may be aligning your tests to at some point in time, is where are we going with this information? Does this person stand up? Do they wiggle a lot at their seat? Should we get them one of those bouncy ball seats? We have a whole bunch of engineers who sit on bouncy ball seats, right? They're 10 times more productive when they are because they're wiggling and going crazy. And I see the tech people all smiling, right? Because you know that's the way it works. Right, okay, right? But we wouldn't know that if we didn't have the data to track it, right? And being able to track subtle motions and subtle movements like that. The other area is neuroassessment technologies. If you were at the EATP conference in Portugal last year, Manny Strahl did a wonderful session where he showed how this device he bought off Amazon for about $200 that reads basically signals in the brain. It's just a really simplified EEG. Right? By showing different things, you can track whether or not the person is comfortable in getting the information or uncomfortable in not getting the information, right? So now with this type of technology and this software getting so advanced that you can run this off your smartphone, right? You no longer perhaps need an actual assessment. You don't need to sit down because while they were going through the content, right, you know whether or not they've captured this information and are able to retain it. Okay. Now, I have to give some cautions about AI, having done this for 20 plus years now. Don't hold AI to a higher standard than you do your humans, right? I will put a machine up against a human in just about any situation, right? Because we know how a machine's going to perform. It's a straight line, right? Humans have good days and bad days. And if we go back to our constructed response scoring example, how many of you have ever had a fight with your spouse before you went to work that day, right? And were you mean to everyone? Yeah, guess what? Same thing happens on your grading of your assessments, right? And yeah, there are processes and things put in place, but don't hold the humans to the same process that you do the AI engine, right? You've got to make sure that that doesn't happen as you start your evaluations. They are different. The issue of bias came up a few times this morning, and I think it is a critically important component. I think you had mentioned that these are machines, right? They are learning machines. It's machine learning and really advancing how far ahead they go. If they learn from information that is biased, if you come in and say, I don't like any student whose name is Joe, right? And Joe is part of the consumption of information for the learning engine, it's going to hammer every kid named Joe. We had a flip of this that I'll share with you working in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We were doing a large-scale scoring project, and we had results come back from a constructed response test, and they said, absolutely not, this paper is wrong. They were like, okay, that's a possibility. Computers can be wrong sometimes. Let's take a look at it. Ran it through multiple expert humans. Everyone agreed. Everyone agreed with the machine. We're like, look, this is fine, right? And they said, Paul, you do not understand. This is a member of the royal family. It doesn't matter what happens. This person passes this test, right? And so this is a bias on the negative side that we don't want to bake into the engine, right? Someone from the Al Saud family doesn't automatically skew your data and skew your learning towards the wrong side with this. These are important points. Everyone is getting into the AI business, right? And everyone is getting venture capital money. If you're in the market for money, now is the time to raise it. And so if you have a company that comes to your organization and says, we have AI, and look at all this venture capital money we have, really vet them hard. We fear more the kid working in his garage than we do the AI-backed or the venture-backed company that has, you know, one algorithm that we've been able to crack in the first time we sat down to play with it. And so as you look at these AI providers, make sure they've been around for a while, make sure that you understand as much as you can. Most of them won't tell you what's happening, right? And you got to get comfortable with that, but then you've got to kick the tires on a lot of other avenues there. You can go off the edge pretty quickly with this type of technology. Remember, when you hit scale and you do things better, or when you do things faster, right, sometimes you make mistakes just that much faster. And so make sure you're going through your standard processes. This is where the psychometricians come in very handily when they pump the brakes for those of us in the technology field. And then make sure you're capturing the cognitive diversity, right? Because these are machine learning systems, right? We have a lot of wonderful people in on this entire planet, and you've got to make sure you capture that in the training process. Otherwise, you're leaving out a candidate. And I don't want you to build for the rare case that comes up, but you should remember that these are machines that learn and consume information. And if you just go to your standard client over and over and over again, you're going to get the standard answers, and you're not going to advance your programs at all. The AI has this wonderful possibility to take things significantly further, farther, faster, but you want to make sure that you capture the full spectrum that you're doing. Okay. And some closing thoughts. I can't build a plane. I can't fly a plane. I can't fix a plane, but I trust that technology to get me where I go, and every one of you does as well when you get onto an airplane. I'm assuming you all fly. When you get onto an airplane, right, you don't know how to build it, you don't know how to fix it, you don't know how to fly it, but you're going to trust that technology, right, because it's been through an engineering process. We have to be careful of the mythology of our industry, right? The word can't comes up all the time, or we need to study that longer, right? At a certain point in time as a technologist, I will tell you, we push a product out into the marketplace. How long was Google in beta? Like 6 years, right? You've got to get stuff into the marketplace because you're not going to know all the parameters. You're not going to know everything there is to be known. 99% with technology and in the field is a heck of a lot, and knowing what your recovery is a lot better than 100% and actually never getting to market, right? You've got to start thinking about those things. And just keep in mind, there is no finish line with technology. We've all heard people say, my children this, my children that, right? The reality is that's only going to get worse, right? There's going to constantly be the next thing that surpasses it. And if we don't, as an industry, catch up and make the Innovations in Testing Conference more than the same, wow, we went to computer-based testing, or we went to internet-based testing, we're all doomed, right? And that is a bad thing. So with that, thanks.